Imagine trying to explain the world to someone from 1945. You bought a record, you owned the record. You bought a camera, you own the camera. You bought a game, you owned the game. Yahtzee. But somewhere along the way, ownership started turning into something else. Now you subscribe to music, you subscribe to software, you subscribe to movies, you subscribe to cloud storage, and you subscribe to games. Sometimes you even subscribe to use the device you already bought. And if you stop paying, the gate closes.
Welcome to the Tollbooth economy. A world where everyday life feels like driving down a highway that never ends. Except now the road is lined with gates. A subscription there, convenience fee there, a service charge you didn't notice until checkout. Individually, these charges seem small, but collectively, they raise a strange question about the modern world. When did everything become a toll booth? And maybe more importantly, how did we get here?
Economists actually have a name for this phenomenon: rent-seeking. The term was developed in the late 20th century by economists like Gordon Tullock and Ann Kruger. Rent-seeking describes a system where companies increase their profits, not by creating new value, but by controlling access to something that already exists. Not building the road, charging for the gate. Examples are everywhere: ticket fees, platform commissions, subscription services, licensing barriers. The strategy is simple: insert yourself between people and the thing they want, then charge for passage.
Today, you and I live in a period of tremendous growth, which confronts us with many problems.
For much of the 20th century, the American economy focused on one simple principle: make things. Factories produced cars, appliances, televisions, and machinery. Workers earned wages. Consumers bought the products. Growth came from producing more and better goods.
Yee-haw!
But beginning in the 1970s, something changed. Manufacturing slowed, and another sector began to dominate the economy: finance. Economists call this shift financialization. Instead of making products, companies increasingly focused on managing money, assets, and financial returns. One symbolic turning point occurred in 1971 during the Nixon shock. The United States abandoned the gold standard. Global finance expanded rapidly. Capital began moving faster than goods. Money itself became the product. Around the same time, a new corporate philosophy spread through business schools. The idea that a company's primary responsibility was to maximize returns for shareholders. This doctrine was famously championed by economist Milton Friedman. Under this framework, corporate strategy changed dramatically. Companies were encouraged to cut labor costs, outsource production, increase prices, introduce new fees, and convert products into services. The goal was no longer just building great products. The goal was maximizing profit per customer. As this transformation accelerated, another pattern emerged: an explosion of intermediaries, consultants, platform operators, data brokers, payment processors, and investment managers. Each positioned themselves between producers and consumers, and each collected a percentage. Over time, the economy became less about making the product and more about managing the transaction. Economist Mariana Mazzucato describes this as a shift from value creation to value extraction. Instead of generating new wealth, many industries began extracting rent from existing systems. The internet supercharged this process. Digital platforms became the new infrastructure of the economy. App stores, online marketplaces, streaming services, gaming networks. These platforms often don't produce the goods themselves. They operate the space where transactions occur. And like landlords, they collect rent. Economist Nick Strisek describes this system as platform capitalism. The platform becomes the road. Everyone else pays to drive on it. But platforms follow a strange life cycle. First, they are wonderful. They're fast. They're free. They make life easier. Users flock to them. Businesses join. And eventually, investors arrive asking the inevitable question, how do we extract more revenue? Technology writer Cory Doctorow calls the result enshittification. Platforms begin by serving users, then they prioritize advertisers. Finally, they optimize for shareholders. That original magic disappears, but by that point, everyone is already locked in. The toll booths of modern life are rarely catastrophic. They're small. A few dollars here, a login screen there. But collectively, they create something psychologists call cognitive load. Every decision we make consumes mental energy. Do I need this subscription? Which password was that? Why is this feature locked? Over time, these tiny frictions accumulate into something like background stress. Psychologist Roy F. Baumeister describes this phenomenon as decision fatigue. The more choices people face, the more likely they are to choose the easiest option. Which is exactly why modern systems often look like this. Free version? Complicated. Paid version? Simple. Eventually, people click the paid option just to make the friction disappear. One industry perfected the toll booth strategy earlier than most: airlines. Before the 1980s, buying a plane ticket was simple. You paid for the flight, your luggage was included, your seat was included. Then the airline industry was deregulated under the Airline Deregulation Act, and the competition increased. But the profit margins shrank. So airlines began experimenting with a new strategy: unbundling. Instead of selling a complete service, they broke it into pieces: baggage fees, seat selection fees, priority boarding, change fees, and even carry-on luggage charges. The base ticket became just the price of entry. Everything else became optional, or at least optional enough to charge extra. At the same time, another transformation was taking place. Products were becoming subscriptions. Instead of paying once and owning something, customers began paying monthly for access. Software companies led the shift. A famous example is Adobe moving its creative software into the subscription platform Adobe Creative Cloud. Programs that once cost hundreds of dollars now cost smaller amounts every month. Forever. The model spread quickly. Music, movies, games, news, cloud storage. Even cars are experimenting with subscription features. Heated seats, navigation, remote start. The hardware is already installed, but the feature remains locked until the subscription activates it. The tollbooth economy doesn't only exist online. It increasingly shapes physical infrastructure. Roads, utilities, parking systems, airports. Large investment firms now purchase infrastructure because it produces stable, long-term revenue. Once infrastructure becomes an investment asset, its purpose changes. Instead of maximizing access, the goal becomes maximizing revenue. A famous example occurred in Chicago during the Chicago parking meter lease. The city leased control of its parking meters to private investors for 75 years. Parking rates increased dramatically, and control of the streets shifted away from the city itself. Infrastructure had become an investment product. History shows that economic systems often push toward extremes before correcting themselves. Rising inequality helped trigger the French Revolution. Industrial monopolies helped spark the Progressive Era of reforms in the United States. Today, many economists see similar warning signs. Wealth concentration has increased dramatically. Research by Thomas Piketty shows a growing share of wealth flowing to the top of the income distribution. At the same time, public trust in institutions continues to decline. Consumers are experiencing something economists call subscription fatigue. People can only maintain so many recurring payments before the system breaks down. A few years ago, a phrase circulated widely online: "You will own nothing and be happy." It's often linked to discussions from the World Economic Forum, though it originally came from a speculative future scenario, not a formal policy. But the reason it resonated wasn't because of who said it, kind of. It's because it already felt true. Streaming replaced owning. Subscriptions replaced buying. Licenses replaced possession. The statement didn't sound like a prediction. It sounded like a description. There's a known failure mode in complex systems. If you optimize too aggressively for one outcome, the system breaks. Here, the outcome is profit maximization. Every layer becomes more efficient at extracting value, but less effective at delivering it. Customer service disappears. Products fragment. Prices become harder to understand. Trust erodes. Then the system becomes incredibly good at one thing, worse at everything else. This creates a very specific kind of tension. Consumers pay more, workers receive less, owners capture more. The research by Thomas Piketty also shows that returns on capital have consistently outpaced wage growth over time, which means the people who own assets gain faster than the people who rely on income. It's not just inequality, it's structural. Systems like this don't usually collapse all at once. They stretch, they tighten, they absorb pressure until something gives. Economist Albert O. Hirschman described the three responses people have when systems stop working: exit, voice, or loyalty. They leave, they protest, or they stay and accept it. For a long time, most people have stayed. But something is shifting. Subscription fatigue, institutional distrust, a growing sense that everything is becoming more expensive and more complicated without becoming better. Economist Joseph Stiglitz has warned that when rent-seeking dominates markets, they stop functioning efficiently. They don't just become unfair, they become unstable. At a certain point, the question changes. It is no longer, why is everything so expensive? it becomes, why does everything require permission? Permission to access, permission to use, permission to participate, and permission can always be denied. Now here I sit talking about subscription services, permissions, and fees, but of course I'm going to ask for help directly from you guys to keep doing these videos because YouTube doesn't pay much of anything, and I don't have advertisers. It's kind of the Kafkaesque world we live in. I feed your brain and you feed me doll hairs. Patreon, please. Thank you, voyeurs.